When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm glad to be here with you all. Still a little bit late, but we had some technical issues getting up in here. So it happens when you haven't been on in about 2 weeks. I can't believe that I have been off for 2 weeks, not been on with you all. But I wanted to make sure that we put something out this week for Erudition and to touch with you all again, or at least on a weekly basis, and discuss some things historical. If you are new to this program, this is a interactive program. Typically, we do this on Thursday, but today I'm doing a special program on Saturday to make up for the fact that I wasn't here. To go over Black history or history that is often not covered, not properly represented, revisioned. And so what we try to do within this interactive program is to provide you with information, sources, and places that you can go, and a discussion on historical matters that, about Black history that aren't often shared in our schools, communities. Some things have been forgotten. Some things have been taken for granted. Excuse me. And so what we want to do is to provide you with that history. I always try to give a little bit because this is a special episode. So I know a lot of people, it's Saturday. A lot of people have things that they do on Saturdays, but I try to get on here during these times to be able to speak with you all. And if I can do a special, I will. But since I know a lot of people may have other things going on today, please, if you are watching this as a recording on YouTube or whatever, please feel free to drop questions, opinions, and things into the remarks section. And I promise you, we will get back with you very quickly to provide you with some kind of assistance or help or whatever question that you have. So I'm going to try to give maybe a moment or two to get people in here. Additionally, I should add that if you are joining us on Facebook, and say you're joining us on Facebook and you're in the live chat, something is going on with Facebook. Has been going on for about a month or so, where it's very hard for us to see your comments. If that is the case, please make your way over to YouTube. There is a YouTube live chat. You can go into that chat on YouTube, and you can chat with us about the issues and the things that we're covering today. I am going to drop the link for that live chat in here for you, if you don't know, or you can just go to and type in the Erudition Network on YouTube, and you should be able to see us, um, and you'll see that the chat is live. All right, so I'm dropping that up in there for you, or you can just click that link. If you are joining us tonight, And please let us know that you're with us. Drop a, that you're here, hello or whatever, so that I know that you're in here and I can respond to you in kind. All right. So I don't want to. I gave a little bit of time. I see that we got about 2 people in here. Um, I gave a little bit of time for people to join us because, as I said, it is a Saturday. But tonight, um, I want to join you all. Um, Tony, I see your comments um, on Facebook. I know you said you're driving, but because I just clicked on it, but I wasn't seeing it on StreamYard. It does that. I apologize. But tonight, I want to talk about the subject tonight. Is something that I think we really need to cover. It's the history um, of blacks in America. I say blacks because some of you all get in your feelings when I say African American, and we need to do a show about that. But the history of blacks and guns in America. Um, it is a contentious history because whenever you talk about blacks with guns, it always seems to um, trigger some people to think, well, they have to be thugs, gang members, someone who is up to some kind of nefarious purpose. And in fact, that's really not the case. But because we have programmed ourselves as a world, I won't even say just America, we've programmed ourselves to see this in a threatening manner. And because of this separate programming, we can't allow people to simply be humans who want to protect themselves and their families. And there are many, many, many historical markers on that as to why this is an issue. And I want to talk about that tonight. I guess the first thing that I should talk about is the issue going on in Ohio. Um, over the last week, you have seen Black people in Ohio arming themselves or starting an armed group, right, in Lincoln Heights, which is a historic Black community that was one of the communities that was started as Blacks started to migrate out of the South. But recently, they had Nazis show up and rally outside of schools and institutions in their community. The racists who showed up had dogs, they were armed, and they were deep. They had a lot of people with them. We allow people to protest. We allow people to say and do pretty much a lot of things under the law in America. But at the same time, there are things that are threats. There is a legal definition of what is a threat. There are fighting words. There are things that have been put into law where people know exactly what they're doing. If you were to go and look at the history of America, you will go, and I opened up a few things, just took some shots because, as you guys know, there are a lot of things that you can go on here. Let me see if I can share. Oh, excuse me. Some of these, but there are a lot of things, a lot of history to that. Back in the day, back in the 20s, the Klan made up it was average that 1 out of 7 people were a member of the KKK. all over the country. People, the second birth of the Klan rose up. They did marches all over the country. But one that is definitely remembered is their march through the streets in D.C. Because at the time, the president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, had allowed people to believe that racism was not a taboo subject. It was not a taboo subject. And so the marching that they did and going around with the American flag is very representative of what we're still seeing today. People, they align patriotism with racism. And they tell themselves that those two things are together. This is a white man's country. This is a white man's world. And this, like even with this image, is to show you that they're pushing the idea that we are the example of American exceptionalism. This is what we are. However, I want to show you some contrasting images, right? So they went from this, and then let's look at what the neo-Nazis and the Nazis and KKK did in Lincoln Heights recently. And we need to discuss this because we need to look at it in a way where we start to see how they play with our perception. So I want to hit that first before we go into more direct historical references, right? But if you look at the way they showed up at Lincoln Heights, right? Skull masks on, dark flags, standing over bridges, walking around with dogs, walking around schools with Black children with dogs. It is intimidation. And one of the things that we need to know historically is that there is always this idea of threatening the Black family, not necessarily saying that they don't threaten the Black man particularly, but the threatening of the Black family is something that is deeply rooted in the American consciousness, right? We have art depictions, we have things that have been shown throughout history that showcase to you, right, how they see us, how they threaten our families, how they threaten our ability to protect our families. I took a article from Anti-Slavery Almanac from 1839, and I'm going to show that image, right, of people burning down a school for colored girls. So the idea of racists attacking our institutions, our schools, our families is not something that is new. It is not new, right? During the draft riots, during the Civil War, Black schools and Black children and Black women were attacked, were killed, were lynched. Because again, it is the way to say we cannot protect our families, we cannot protect those who we love, and it is a mental disarmament for the Black family. And so we can't even discuss the arming of Black Americans without understanding why they needed to be armed, why historically it was understood that you needed to have a weapon in your home to protect your family. Here's another historical picture again, showcasing Klansmen pointing a gun, and look who they're pointing the gun. Look at the way that the artist depicted it. Young Black kids by candlelight with the mother and the father, and the father or whoever's sitting, or the grandparents sitting in the corner, and they're aiming the gun into the house. Now we say, Eddie, those times are over with. We no longer live in those times, right? But we do, which is why the people of Ohio, of Lincoln Heights, decided to go out and defend their families. But let's talk about that too, because the images that were put out of the people in Lincoln Heights were also nefarious, because again, when you have a media that you do not control, they say and do things that are wrong, that are sending a message even in the visual. So one of the images that was unsettling to me, because I understood how they played that image, was a photo that was taken by a member of the press that showed a black gun in the hand of a person, right? In the hand of a person standing by a school bus. If you took this image out of context, which I'm sure somebody eventually will, this image forms the idea that there is some threatening thing going with a black person with a gun. If you look at the other images that they put out of a black man standing around a house with a gun, completely out of context, right? But insinuating as a photo, right, that something is definitely wrong. But what is wrong? Not aligning it with the fact that this was for defense, right? But putting it out as if there is something wrong, right, with black people having guns. You contrast that to the images that we've all seen of white whole families, even the kids, right, holding guns, right, and just smiling and happy, not even an issue. But we have many issues and pictures of that. They can own those guns. They can sit with their families. They can say, hey, we're protecting ourselves. They can do all of those things, and it is never nefarious. It's never wrong. It's never something that is looked at as a threat. Little Jimmy can get a gun for Christmas, and that's fine. We can sit around with our guns at Christmas, and that's fine. But when we see blacks with guns, we make it nefarious. We make it un-American. And if you think that I'm poking at racism, you're wrong, because we have many cases in this so-called constitutional carry world where blacks have had guns just on them. Philando Castile is an example. Even when we tell them that we are legal gun owners and we have guns, or even if they see you running down the street with a gun on you, automatically as a black person, you are a threat. You are a threat. But not those kids, not the images that are put out there year after year after year after year, showing families with their guns, happily standing around, showcasing that we're ready to fight if need be. Even a baby is holding a gun, right? And creating this culture that is gun laden, right? And let me tell you something. I'm not anti-gun. I'm not telling you don't have a right to own a gun. I'm telling you that you do. But That's on the face of the law. This is what you see as the right to own a gun. But when you contrast it with the image that I showed you a little while ago of the black man holding a gun, even though he's protecting his community, that's seen as a threat. The feeling you see with this is cheerful to a lot of people, joyous. It's constitutional. It's okay. This is what we should be doing. But then when I show you this image, there's something wrong. What is he doing? Why does he have that gun? Why is he in my community with that gun? Something's wrong with that. So tonight, as we discuss this, and if you're joining us, please let us know you're here. Let me know you're here, so I know I'm not just talking into the void. It keeps me knowing that I'm not here alone on this. I want your thoughts. I want your thoughts, even if you think that I'm wrong. Even if you're watching the replay of this and you think that I'm wrong, please feel free to drop your thoughts. I'm not beyond us having these conversations. As a matter of fact, I think we need to have these conversations. I think that they are important enough that we are still facing these things hundreds of years after the fact. After the fact, we're still facing problems. I'm going to share with you, at least I'm going to try to share with you my screen here. I often try to mapify some of my thoughts, because I really believe that we need to approach these things systematically. And so I'm going to share with you. Give me one moment here. A couple of things. Excuse me. And we're going to kind of go through this. I apologize for my, excuse me. I was a little crazy. But we're going to go through this and try to approach it in a way that I can explain this pretty well and give you some kind of visual trying to get it into a point where I know that you all can see it. Let's start with that right here. And then what we'll do is we'll move accordingly. Let's talk about this history here. A lot of what we're seeing is pretty crazy. I think there is one African American owned gun manufacturing company in America. That I would have to check, Eric, but that's a good point. I don't know. But what I will say is that as we go into this, let me tell you something. There was a time in this country where it was okay for you as a Black person. As a matter of fact, it was a requirement. If we look at the, go back and we look at the cowboys, if we go back and look at the early pioneers, a gun was necessary. It was necessary, right? For you to be able to live, take care of your family, hunt, do things that would be able to take care of you and yours. Now, when you see people with guns, blacks with guns, it's a threat. But why is it perceived as a threat? If we were to go back and look at the Takis War, let's look about Jamaica. You say, well, why do I talk about Jamaica? But I wanted to break down this thing. In the 1760s, before the establishment of this country, and although it's not necessarily America, but a lot of the triangle slave trade that showed up in America, right, is influenced by the things that had already happened before the full establishment of America. But the Maroons, right, or enslaved Africans who had escaped bondage, they were rebelling against the British, who owned the colonies, who owned the area. They were demonstrating their ability to protect themselves. They armed themselves and they fought and they resisted. And so the idea of having blacks fight against you, right, is something that early Americans did not want to have happen, and they definitely didn't want people to be informed about it. And so what they did was they tried to hide these things. If you look at the Gullah Geechee rebellions, right, where enslaved people in the South Carolinas and in Georgia fought and resisted slavery. And they used guerrilla tactics. They used the woods. They used things to be able to keep the whites out of their area. Escaped slaves became a threat to these early people when they were armed. And to this very day, it is seen as a challenge when we have armed blacks. And it doesn't matter if they're protecting their families. It doesn't matter, right, if they're trying to make sure that they're protected or they can take care of their families, especially during the time of slavery. And we could probably, and I'm sure there's some historian that's going to say, well, that was during the time of slavery and people who had the right to do that, Eddie, and they were okay with doing that because they saw them as slaves. They didn't see them as people. But we need to understand what the consciousness of that historically did to white pre-America and then later America. And then as we got closer or got within the early American state, that was something that had to be taken down. Go back and watch my earlier episodes. The earlier episodes that I have done where I talk about, right, the Maroons, where I talk about the blacks who escaped slavery and lived in the marshes and lived in their own land and went back to help bring their people out of slavery, who went back and took things from the plantations, who lived in these areas that the whites were afraid to go in, and how the Native Americans formed and joined with them to teach them routes and to teach them ways to get through those wildernesses, and how whites started to establish anti-Indian and black laws to dissuade people, the Native American, the civilized tribes, from aligning themselves with blacks, from teaching them and weaponizing and giving them weapons. And even so much to Thomas Jefferson went and told the Cherokee Nation that if you want to be accepted by America, you need to align yourself with American thought on slavery. And so we had American indigenous people enslaving and having black slaves. I told you all a few weeks ago when we talked about the Trail of Tears, people don't know that blacks were on the Trail of Tears with the indigenous. because they were their property. The ability to have a gun in Black history meant you had the ability to defend yourself. When we talk about, as we move further, the German Coast Uprising of 1811, I'm not going to go into the real deep history with each one of these, but I wanted you to see them because these are things that we don't talk about that still affect American conscience, that still inform the bigots and the racists. This was a large uprising. This was a large uprising. It was led by a man named Charles Deslandes, where he took hundreds of enslaved people and they went and they attacked plantations along the Mississippi River. Whenever we talk about the German Coast Uprising, a lot of people always tell me, I never heard of that. I was never told about that. Why? Because in the end of the day, no one wanted these stories to go out. That from January 8th to possibly January 11th of 1811, there was this huge uprising because you have people walking around with shirts right now talking about, I'm not my ancestors. Your ancestors fought. Just because you don't know it. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean it didn't happen. People decided they weren't going to take it anymore. Now in Louisiana, they still commemorate this, but it is not something generally in our consciousness and who we are, because it was taken from us and denied. Go back, research it, pull it up, and you will have a better understanding of why people in Lincoln Heights today and others are arming themselves in the idea that we're not going to deal with this. We're not going to deal with this. And yet we still have people, right, who tell us that, you know, our ancestors didn't want to do anything. You know, this brings me another thought. There's a great book. I have it. I was going to pull it up over here somewhere. There's a great book by James Foreman Jr. It's called Locking Up Our Own. And in that book, James Foreman talks about the idea of why Blacks decided. It's a great book. It should be, here it is. Go on Amazon. I greatly support James's book. It's a great book. Get on there and get that book. But there's sections of the book where he talks about how we disarmed ourselves into the 60s, how we went about this idea during the civil rights movement and we disarmed ourselves. And people leave out the fact that during the beginning of even Dr. King's movement, Blacks had guns on them. We remove the history of the Deacons for Defense, right? Who worked and did security for a lot of the marches. We don't talk about these things. We know about the Black Panther Party, right? And we know about the Mulford Act in 1967, where they decided that they were going to pass a anti-gun law led by Ronald Reagan as governor that prohibited the public carrying of loaded firearms because they were afraid that black people were walking around with guns defending their communities. The same conservatives who now say that this should be constitutional carry wanted to strip you of the ability to carry your gun, even though the communities in California, after the Great Migration and after the pushing of drugs into those communities, police were going in and attacking and harming folks in the 60s. There is a profound history of the hypocrisy of America as it pertains to guns. It is a profound history. And there's no way within the hour that I'm on tonight that we can go through all of it. But I want to give you some things to think about. On my list, and I don't know why my map, if I didn't, they talk about this thing, but I think before you ever get to the Cato's conspiracy, you got to talk about the Stonewall Rebellion of 1739. It is, again, one of the largest uprising of enslaved African Americans or blacks before the establishment of the country. And the person who was given the credit for leading it was a indigenous black named Jimmy. And what happened was these enslaved blacks gathered at the Stono River. They armed themselves and they marched towards Florida. And as they were marching with their weapons and their people, their numbers of escaped slaves and people started to grow. And then they were met with white colonists and racists, right, who told them to go back home, go back to your plantations, go back to where you were supposed to be. And they, as they marched through in the Stonewall Rebellion, they were singing the songs of the time that talked about liberty. They were chanting, "We want to be free." And they took a colonial militia, some of the same people who later will go train those other folks who fought for the revolution, American Revolution. And they killed and murdered and squashed that rebellion. And then they put laws to be able to bring in what we now call the police and slave patrols to keep these slaves on their plantations. But as I go through history books, I very rarely hear about the Stonewall Rebellion. But to show you how important those things are, what they do is they inspire. They inspire. And that is the threat that America sees when it talks about blacks being armed with weapons. It is not just the idea of a black person armed with a weapon. It is what it creates. There was a man, a liberal, on television the other day, as my wife was watching television, who said, after seeing the people armed in Lincoln Heights, he said, well, is anybody afraid that this is going to inspire or going to have people do the same thing around the country? It's a white guy, supposedly liberal. But that's the fear. Are we going to see black people all over the country taking up arms? But the same question wasn't asked about those people, right, who had these weapons and dogs and were going around in Lincoln Heights in Ohio threatening the Black community. They don't talk about the Dylan Ruths and all of these people who have gone in and terrorized Black communities. Those people who have killed, murdered. Nobody's asking about, hey, do you think that they should have guns and this, that? No, nobody's asking that question. Because that's not important. What is important is, should we be worried? Right? Should we be worried about Blacks arming themselves around the country? Should we concern ourselves with the idea that we could see them in our communities? And even though I'm a liberal, and even though I say that I support it, should I be worried about this? Because I don't want people imitating this and going out and making me feel threatened. They don't want Blacks armed. And when they see it, it's already a visceral reaction, and it's always going to be something that's chaotic, and it's almost always going to lead to some innocent person being killed. And that's not me just making up history. That's the reality. So before we ever get to the Cato conspiracy, we had to talk about the Stono Rebellion. Cato's conspiracy in 1739 happened again in South Carolina. This is what I mean by how people are inspired. They're inspired. Something happens and they get inspired. But unfortunately, because of the laws that had been put into place, it was a test. And the reason why we talk about Cato's conspiracy is because it was the first example of people giving Black special rights to tell on each other, the laws being put in to stop rebellion, right? And it goes on and on and on. The movie Amistad. I put Amistad in here because Amistad is another example where people who were on a Spanish slave ship after the fact that the British said that they no longer were participating in the slave trade, they rose up and took out the crew. And they came and were intercepted by the United States Navy. And then had to fight in court to be free and return home. But what was testified to in the courts and what was pushed and pushed and pushed was the violence of these Africans, even though they themselves have been put in the chains and taken from their homeland. We have to talk about Armistead again because these are stories that they tell in a way to make us feel a certain way. The Colfax massacre, and I kind of hopped through and took these things as they were because there are so many to talk about. The Colfax massacre is important because, again, in 1873, Blacks defended the courthouse. This case is important because it allowed for, as Blacks were murdered and killed, it changed American law. It allowed the Supreme Court of the time to say that Blacks were not going to be given, this is after the Civil War, they weren't going to be given consideration by the federal government to protect their rights from being murdered. It would be left to the states to decide if what was done by whites in a state was in fact murder and if it would even be prosecuted. And it allowed for the disarmament in many areas of blacks to have their guns and rifles taken from them so that they couldn't defend themselves. And then told the states, well, if you kill them, it's up to you to decide if it was a murder, a lynching. And it basically gave carte blanche the ability for whites to go and gun and kill blacks in the South post-Reconstruction. Robert Charles I put in because if you go read Ida B. Wells, The Red Record, there's a huge section where she talks about Robert Charles and how Robert Charles was a really fair-skinned black man who happened to be standing around talking to a white woman with a friend. And a cop came up and harassed them. And arguably, however it happened historically, because historians argue it, he wound up shooting a policeman. And as the police, he was trying to get out of town, another black man told him where he lived. A black man that later was killed mysteriously. Told him where he lived, and people showed up. And Robert Charles held off 100 white people, shooting them as they tried to come to take him unfairly, as he believed. And I would tell you to go read Ida B. Wells' Red Record. Pull up the part where she talks about Robert Charles, because she went and interviewed the officials in the area and their take on blacks being armed and able to protect themselves. We have a history, a long history. I don't really think I need to get into Red Summer. Go back, watch my episodes of a few weeks ago where we really kind of got into Red Summer. But I really would tell you that when you look at Red Summer, probably one of the most nefarious incidents in Red Summer was the time in which, after World War I, people decided that they were going to go storm the black communities in Washington, D.C. And these servicemen who had came back with their guns protected themselves and their community with the guns that they bought back from their service. And how after that, they started to put more restrictions even in the North. And how the prohibitions of weapons were basically based on the color of people. The color of people. And as the historian Douglas Blackman said, there's a crime of black people carrying concealed weapons. And it's the crime is that they are black. We are in a new era right now where people are in a need of protecting themselves. Folks are getting emboldened. Folks are getting murderous. The Dylan Roofs who show up in churches and shoot people. The white young man who went to a grocery store and shot black folks in the grocery store. Fatty Lou Hamer said she kept a shotgun in every corner of her home. And she said the first white man that even looked like he wants to throw some dynamite in my house, he won't never write his mama again. And she made sure people understood it is right for you to protect yourself. It is all right for you to say, I deserve to be who I am. Every time Black people show up in mass with weapons or things to protect themselves, it is called a riot in American history. They've had to go back and change some of the verbiage, because when you look it up, what our kids are taught is it's a riot. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. If you look at what the definition of a riot is, it is a violent rampage. It is a violent commotion. It is a violent attack. Even when we weren't attacking. January 6th, that's a riot. That's not, they call it an insurrection. That's a riot. Turning cars over in the street, burning down stores for a sports event, that's a riot. Marching and saying, I deserve to be who I am, is not a riot. We say that there is a constitutional carry in a lot of these states. We say that. We tell ourselves this, but the truth is, that's not the way they see it. That's not the way they see it. And I don't know if that'll ever change. But I want you to remember, right? The 22-year-old man, John Crawford, who was in Walmart in Ohio, same state as those in Lincoln. And someone reported that he had a gun. And a cop stormed in and shot that man dead. At a state where you could have open carry. I want you to remember Tamir Rice, right? Playing in outside of a park with a cap gun. Someone said, there's a boy out here who has a gun. In Ohio. And they shot him dead. Quickly. And it wasn't even a real gun. Neither one of these people in Ohio had real guns. So when you see people in Ohio protecting their schools, protecting their families, understand why they feel they have to. Understand the chance that they're taking. Because they've killed Black men here. They've murdered them. But it's okay. It's okay for them to show up in our communities. It's okay for them to run up in our communities with dogs and guns. We have a right to protect our families. Tonight, I wanted to take you over a little bit of the history behind it. But the truth is, the history is so vast. And I wish more people were on tonight. I would love to hear your stories, your thoughts on it. But I also want you to consider the difference between a riot, a violent attack, the Black Panther Party marching around with their guns in their community, protecting those the at risk in their community, the kids, their women, their families. I want you to think about that. How when Black Lives Matter got out there to go march, they called them terrorists, even when they didn't have weapons. Even Black people in our own communities said, well, why don't they protest about Black on Black crime? And forgetting that there are organizations in all of these cities who fight daily against Black on Black violence, gang violence in the communities, who put themselves at risk all the time. But the fear that was put out by the media was that anytime Black people said, I no longer want to be threatened by your police, the same police who you gave power to in the early parts of this country, the same people who you empowered during the Stonewall Rebellion, during the Cato Conspiracy, the same people who went out and attacked Robert Charles and started what you call the Robert Charles riot. The same people who invaded our communities in 1919 and lynched and murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of Black people across the country. The same people who showed up in 1921 in Oklahoma and did the Tulsa Race Massacre. The same people in 1919 who did the Elaine Massacre in Arkansas. The same people who did the Rosewood Massacre. The same people who showed up en masse with weapons. But you didn't stop them. You didn't stop them. And you don't teach us about our people. You don't teach us about the Deacons for Defense. You don't teach us about Robert Williams, who went and led a defense, an armed self-reliance defense during the Civil Rights Movement. You don't talk about those people because you don't want us to know. And so then we see stupid shirts like, I'm not my ancestors. We see ignorant things. The same people who dropped a bomb in the 80s. In the 80s, they dropped a bomb on the MOVE organization in Pennsylvania because they were too afraid to go in because they said they might have guns. And they killed men, women, and children. We have the right, per the law of the United States, to have a weapon, to protect our property, protect our person, to defend ourselves. And America shouldn't be dictated by an idea of white people sitting around or scowling with their guns, saying that that is America. And if you are a white person that watches this, you shouldn't want that to be the narrative either. Who are you feeling threatened by? That you need a weapon with a scope. Who are you threatened by? How many times on television do you see your young sons and brothers and folks being murdered in the street? But you arm yourselves. You take on the caricature of the cowboy. And you forget that the original cowboys were Black and Latino. You forget the history of America. Or maybe you just weren't taught it because they didn't want you to feel left out. So you redefine America to look like this. And if I have a young son or a teenager walking around with a weapon like this, he's a thug. He a criminal. And black people, we got to be smarter too, because we allow those archetypes and caricatures and stereotypes to play into our movies, our films, into our television, into everything that we do. We allow the idea of the pimp, hustler, thug, criminal to permeate and go through our community and teach us that that's who should have a gun. We don't look back to the history of having a weapon to feed your family, having a weapon to protect your property, having a weapon in what we consider to be respectful. And we've allowed the narrative to mean that anytime a black person has a gun, they are of a threat. Even Dr. King was told by Byron Russell and others, hey, don't allow people to have guns in your movement. Now, as a strategic thing, that was smart. Because if they ran through the protests, they say, well, these people are armed. But as a thing of self-protection, which are two different things. And then to take on, and you ministers who watch this, take on the idea that Christianity says you have the right to murder, kill, and harm me. The historian John Henry Clark said that as a tool, nonviolence was effective. And that's what Dr. King used it as. But at the same time, you have the right to defend yourself, to arm yourself, and to not have it seen as a threat. And when people say, well, why should I feel that way? Go back to the images that I showed you earlier, not just of the white family, right? Go look at the image that I showed you earlier of from the Anti-Slave Almanac, right? That showed you them burning down schools. And black people running out. Go read about the riots, their riots in this country, the draft riots in New York during the Civil War, where the Irish went crazy and started to kill and murder predominantly blacks. Look at the image that I showed you again of historical drawings and paintings of the Klan and their rise and who they were threatening as these were put into newspapers. Who they were threatening. And I see the people standing there with their guns, with their families, arming themselves as if this picture represents them. Our military men in our country who came back from each war, and were lynched, murdered, and killed. That's just the reality. Some in uniforms. And in America today, we're telling ourselves to forget that history. We're removing it, calling it DEI and whatever we want to call it. And we're creating that propaganda that you saw in the white family picture. We're telling Americans that this is America. This is what makes up America. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. This is America. This is who we are. Everybody's armed and we ready and we're happy. with no threat. Who are you threatened by? Remember the image during the Black Lives Matter protests of the white couple standing outside their homes with guns, pointing it at the crowds who weren't armed. I appreciate all of you who have joined us on this broadcast tonight. I ask that you share the broadcast as I get ready to get out of here. I went over my hour a little bit, but this is a very important topic. Please feel free, if you're watching the replay of this later on, to comment, and let us know that you're watching, that you support the Erudition Network. The best way you can support us is by sharing the broadcast. You might see me outside from behind this desk one day because of the help and effort that you give us and sharing the broadcast. If you want to be a financial support or help to the Erudition Network, you see as the broadcast has been going on, you can donate to our Cash App, which is $ the Erudition Network. You will see the Erudition Network symbol. Anything that you provide, anything that you do is greatly helpful. Please get on Amazon, support the books that we have. My wife, Tina Phillips, has who's on Mondays, her book that is on Amazon, or mine, my book. Go on, look for the Erudition Network, 101 Black. Oh, it's right here, 101 Black History Question Challenge. Go get that book. It's a whole lot of knowledge. And once you get it, leave us a review. Let us know how you felt about the book. My wife's book on generational wealth, look for Tina Phillips, Generational Wealth, and you will see her book. It is also on Amazon. Go on there and inform yourself. And thank you. If you do nothing else, please share the program. Share it so that others can gain from what we put out every week. I promise you I'm going to try to be here every week again from here on out. I've had a lot going on. I have a new book to do. I have academic studies that I'm doing, research that I'm doing. And so I take a lot of my time out to try to do these hours in which I do these programs to talk to you all about history and to get you to start asking questions. Go out and get James Foreman's book. Also, this is a really good book, Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America. I bought this book a couple of years ago. It is actually a very good book. It is informative. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning author. You will gain a lot from that book, from his own personal testimonials to historical issues that have happened in the Black community. I want you to be informed. If I missed any comments today, I see you had said something here. Reminds me of People's Grocery lynching. Yes, that is another one that you go look up. The People's Grocery lynchings are a huge part of, again, people being unarmed and being lynched. One of the store owner of the People's Grocery was a close friend of Ida B. Wells, and she writes about that too. I have that over here. I've been talking about it. Go get Ida B. Wells. It's a collective work. I think you can still get this on Amazon. Ida B. Wells. This is her collective works, and then we'll talk about the Red Record and give you information that you need about who we are. Another great book. I know I'm just throwing books out here right now as I just saw it. The Negro Cowboy. As you look at these types of books too, so that you understand who actually was the cowboy, who they were and what they did is not what you're seeing every day, right? Go out there and get this. A great friend of mine sent me this book. He's a archaeologist and a good friend, historian. Go inform yourself. Inform yourself. All right, I've talked for over an hour. I'm gonna get on off of here. I greatly enjoyed being on here with you all today. I apologize for being gone again. Please share the program. That's what I want you to do. Share the program with at least 5 or 6 people that you know, and then share it out there individually. If you're part of a Black History group online that maybe I don't know about, share it to them. Whoever you can to inform, get them to start watching the Erudition Network as we grow this network. I hope you were greatly informed tonight, and I pray that you Join us weekly as we learn together on the Erudition Network. You all be blessed. I thank you. You have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you very much.